Hey, I'm Emma. Welcome to Revenge Pulse, where every story hits different. Hit subscribe and let's dive in. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Not certified mail, not overnight delivery. Just a standard white envelope with my parents' attorney's return address printed in crisp black letters. I held it in my hand outside my apartment, my fingers trembling slightly as I turned it over. Whitmore and Associates, Family Law. I knew what it was before I opened it. I'd known it was coming for 3 months, ever since grandfather passed away, and the will reading revealed that he'd left everything to me. The house in Vermont, the investment portfolio, the lifetime of memories packed into boxers in his attic, all of it $3.4 million worth left to his youngest grandchild. Left to me. Left to me. Inside my apartment, I set my keys on the counter and opened the envelope carefully. The lawsuit was exactly what I'd expected. My parents were contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished mental capacity. They claimed grandfather hadn't been in his right mind when he changed his will 2 years ago. They claimed I'd manipulated him, isolated him from the family. I read the document twice, then set it down and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed. Mom, we didn't want it to come to this. But you left us no choice. Family takes care of family, and you've become very selfish. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd been building for 3 months. Bank statements showing I'd never accepted a single dollar from grandfather while he was alive. Text messages where I'd repeatedly offered to help my parents reconnect with him. Photos of me visiting him every Sunday for 4 years, while my parents couldn't be bothered to drive the 2 hours from Boston. But I knew none of that would matter in court. What would matter was the small rosewood box currently sitting in my bedroom closet, the one grandfather had pressed into my hands 3 weeks before he died. Keep this safe, he'd whispered, his voice thin and reedy. Only open it if you have to. You'll know when. I hadn't opened it yet, hadn't even looked inside, but I had a feeling that time was coming. The family meeting happened the next Sunday at my parents' house in Newton. I drove up from Providence, my stomach churning the entire way. My sister Jennifer's Mercedes was already in the driveway when I arrived, my brother Marcus's Audi right behind it. Inside, they were arranged like a tribunal, Dad in his leather armchair, Mom on the couch, Jennifer and Marcus flanking them like guards. A united front. I sat in the wooden chair across from them, the same chair I'd sat in during every family discussion about my failures growing up. This doesn't have to go to court, Dad said. His voice was measured, reasonable. The same voice he'd used when he was a managing partner at his law firm. The one that convinced clients to settle. We can work this out as a family. How? I asked quietly. Split it evenly. Jennifer sighed, her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen. 4 ways. $850,000 each. That's fair. Grandpa wanted me to have it. Grandpa was 93 and on 6 medications, Marcus said. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He wasn't thinking clearly. You know that. He was sharp until the end. Sarah? Mom's voice carried that disappointed tone I'd heard my entire childhood. Your grandfather loved all of us equally. It's not right that you keep everything when we've all struggled. Your sister has 2 kids in private school. Marcus just bought a house. We all have expenses. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The designer handbag on the couch beside her probably cost more than my monthly rent. I visited him every Sunday for 4 years. I said. Every single Sunday. None of you came. We were busy, Dad said. We have careers. Responsibilities. You work part-time at a bookstore. Sarah, you had time. I made time. And you made sure we didn't, Jennifer said. Her eyes narrowed. You poisoned him against us. Told him we didn't care. I never said anything bad about you. Not once. Then why did he cut us out? Marcus demanded. Why did he leave everything to you, and nothing to his own children, to his grandchildren with actual families? The implication hung in the air. I was 31 and single. No kids. No real career in their eyes. No life that mattered compared to theirs. I don't know why he made that choice, I lied. I knew exactly why, but I wasn't ready to say it yet. Dad stood up. We're giving you 1 week to agree to the split. If you don't, the lawsuit moves forward. And Sarah, he walked over and looked down at me. My firm has the best estate attorneys in Massachusetts. You can't afford anyone who can compete with them. This will be expensive and public, and you will lose. Think about what's best for the family, Mom added. Don't be selfish. I stood up, my legs shaky but my voice steady. I need to think about it. 1 week, Dad repeated. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I finally opened the rosewood box. Inside was a leather journal, worn soft with age. Grandfather's handwriting covered the page, is neat, precise, the script of someone who'd spent decades writing reports. Beneath the journal was a small envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, in Grandfather's hand. For Sarah, when they don't believe you. I opened the journal first. The first entry was dated June 1967. Arrived in Cyprus today. Official cover story, diplomatic liaison. Actual mission, redacted. Working under Protocol Cyprus Shade, team consists of 7. I am 4th in command. My hands started shaking. I flipped through more pages. Code names. Mission reports, references to operations I'd never heard of. Grandfather had been CIA. Not just CIA, he'd been involved in classified operations in Cyprus, Lebanon, Vietnam. Missions that were still classified. Near the end of the journal, an entry from 2019. Changed my will today. Sarah is the only one who visits anymore. The only one who asks about my stories. She listens when I talk about the roses, about the garden, about the old days. She doesn't know what I really did. But she cares about who I am now. That's what matters. I've left her everything because she's the only one who sees me as a person, not a bank account. Richard calls twice a year. Lisa sends Christmas cards with pre-printed signatures. The grandchildren have better things to do. Except Sarah. Sarah shows up. My throat tightened. Another entry, dated just weeks before his death. Richard called today. First time in 8 months. Asked if I'd updated my will recently. Asked about my portfolio performance. Didn't ask how I'm feeling. Didn't ask if I need anything. I know what this is. I've seen it before. In Cyprus, in Beirut, people circling, waiting for weakness, ready to take what they think they're owed. Sarah doesn't know, but I've given her the tools she need. The journal. The documentation, the names that will make certain people listen. If Richard tries to take this to court, and I believe he will, she know what to do. I picked up the sealed envelope and broke the wax. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 names and a handwritten note. These men know what Cyprus Shade means. If you need help, use their names. They owe me. Grandpa, the names included, Judge Harold Brennan, Massachusetts Superior Court, General Thomas Pike Rett, Defense Intelligence Agency, Ambassador Davy G. Chun, State Department Senator Michael Hartley, Senate Intelligence Committee. At the bottom of the page, Grandfather had written, "The truth is sometimes classified. But it's always true. Don't let them take what you've earned by simply showing up." The next 6 days passed in a blur. I contacted an attorney not one of Dad's caliber, but someone young and hungry who believed in my case. I compiled my evidence, text messages, bank statements, photos, visitation logs from Grandfather's assisted living facility, but I kept the journal hidden. My attorney, David Reeves, reviewed everything in his cramped office in downtown Providence. "This is good," he said. "Really good. You've got a strong case for showing you had a genuine relationship with him. But..." He hesitated. "Your father's firm is going to argue mental incapacity hard. They'll bring in experts, medical records, testimonies from doctors. They have resources you don't. I know. If you have anything else, anything that could demonstrate your grandfather's mental state near the end, it would help." I thought about the journal, about Cyprus Shade, about names that could change everything. "I might have something," I said, "but I need to be sure before I use it." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Worcester County Superior Court. I drove up with David, my stomach in knots. The courthouse was imposing, all granite and columns, the kind of building designed to intimidate. Inside, my parents were already there with their legal team. 3 attorneys in expensive suits surrounded Dad. Mom sat beside him, her face carefully neutral. Jennifer and Marcus sat behind them, both looking confident. When they saw me, Jennifer whispered something to Marcus. They both smirked. I sat down next to David at the plaintiff's table. My hands were sweating. The judge entered, not Judge Brennan, but a woman named Judge Patricia Vance. I felt a moment of panic. I'd been counting on the possibility of Brennan hearing the case. But the universe had other plans. This is a hearing regarding the last will and testament of Robert James Sullivan, deceased, Judge Vance said. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. The petitioners are Richard and Lisa Sullivan, seeking to invalidate the will on grounds of undue influence and mental incapacity. Let's begin. Dad's lead attorney, a man named Gerald Whitmore, stood up. He was everything I'd expected, silver-haired, commanding, the kind of presence that filled a courtroom. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of elder exploitation, he began. Robert Sullivan was a 93-year-old man suffering from multiple age-related conditions. In the last 2 years of his life, he was systematically isolated from his family by his granddaughter, Sarah Sullivan, who manipulated him into changing his will to leave her everything, $3.4 million in assets. He presented evidence, medical records showing grandfather's prescriptions for blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and anti-anxiety medication. Testimony from a doctor who'd seen him twice in his final year. Statements from neighbors who said they'd seen me at his house frequently, but rarely saw other family members. The respondent, Whitmore, continued, gesturing at me, took advantage of an elderly man's loneliness to enrich herself. We ask the court to invalidate the 2019 will and reinstate the previous will from 2012, which distributed the estate equally among Mr. Sullivan's children. I listened to him twist everything. My visits became isolation tactics. My relationship with grandfather became manipulation. My inheritance became theft. When it was David's turn, he stood up with our evidence. He presented the text messages where I'd tried to coordinate family visits, bank statements showing I'd never taken money from grandfather, photos of us at the botanical garden, at his favorite restaurant, at the Christmas tree farm we visited every December. Sarah Sullivan loved her grandfather, David said. She visited him weekly because she cared, not because she wanted his money. The evidence shows Mr. Sullivan was of sound mind when he updated his will. He simply chose to leave his estate to the person who showed up. Judge Vance listened, making notes. Then Whitmore presented his expert witness, a psychologist who specialized in elder care. Based on the medical records, the psychologist testified Mr. Sullivan showed signs of cognitive decline in his final years. The combination of medications, his age, and documented memory issues suggest his judgment may have been impaired. Did you ever meet Mr. Sullivan? David asked during cross-examination. No. But the records clearly indicate. So you're basing your entire assessment on medication lists and age, not on any actual evaluation of his mental capacity. The documentary evidence is sufficient to draw conclusions about his cognitive state. I watched Judge Vance's face. She wasn't convinced by David's argument. I could see it in the way she frowned at our evidence, the way she nodded when Whitmore spoke. We were in the scene. During a recess, David pulled me aside in the hallway. They're beating us on the mental capacity angle, he said quietly. The judge is going to side with the medical expert. Unless you have something that definitively proves your grandfather's mental state, we're going to lose this. I touched my bag. The journal was inside, wrapped in a cloth. I have something, I said, but I don't know if I should use it. Sarah, if you have evidence that your grandfather was mentally sharp, we need it now. I thought about grandfather's note. Only open it if you have to. You'll know when. This was the moment. When court resumed, David asked for permission to present additional evidence. Your Honor, we have a journal kept by Mr. Sullivan in his final years that demonstrates his mental acuity and his reasoning for the will changes. Whitmore objected immediately. Your Honor, this is a last-minute ambush. We haven't had time to review this evidence. I only received it recently myself. David said. It was left in a locked box with Ms. Sullivan, to be opened only if the will was contested. Judge Vance looked skeptical. I'll allow it. But Mr. Reeves, this had better be relevant. David handed me the journal. I stood up, my legs shaking, and approached the bench. This is my grandfather's journal, I said. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be. He kept detailed records of his thoughts and observations. It includes entries from 2019, when he changed his will. I opened to one of the later entries and began reading aloud. Richard called today. Asked about my portfolio. Didn't ask how I'm feeling. Sarah brought soup because I mentioned having a cold last week. She remembered. That's the difference. Whitmore smiled. Your Honor, this is just the biased perspective of an elderly man who is being manipulated. It proves nothing about his mental capacity. There's more, I said. I flipped to earlier entries. Read passages about grandfather's daily routine, his observations about politics, his detailed thoughts on investment strategies. The writing was clear, logical, coherent, but Judge Vance still looked unconvinced. Miss Sullivan, she said, while this journal is touching, it doesn't conclusively demonstrate mental capacity. Many people with cognitive decline can still write coherently about certain topics. Do you have anything else? My father's attorney smirked at me, and something inside me snapped. I opened the journal to the first page, to the entries from 1967. Your Honor, my grandfather wasn't just a retired accountant, I said. He worked for the Central Intelligence Agency for 30 years. He was involved in classified operations in Cyprus, Lebanon, and Vietnam. The courtroom went completely silent. Whitmore laughed. Your Honor, this is absurd. The respondent is now claiming her grandfather was some sort of spy. This is desperation. I have documentation, I said. I pulled out the envelope with the names, handed it to Judge Vance. She read it, and her expression changed. The skepticism faded, replaced by something else. Wariness. Miss Sullivan, where did you get these names? My grandfather left them for me. He said if I needed help proving who he was, these people could verify it. Judge Vance looked at Whitmore, then at me, then at the names again. I'm going to need to verify this information, she said slowly. We'll recess for 30 minutes. The 30 minutes turned into an hour. Then, 2 hours. My parents grew increasingly agitated. Dad kept talking to Whitmore in hushed, urgent tones. Jennifer and Marcus looked confused and angry. I sat quietly next to David, my hands folded in my lap. What did you just do? David whispered. I told the truth, I said. Finally, Judge Vance returned. Her face was unreadable. I've made some calls, she said, to verify the information provided by Ms. Sullivan. I'm limited in what I can say due to classification issues, but I can confirm that Robert Sullivan was indeed employed by the federal government in a capacity that involved sensitive operations. Whitmore stood up. Your Honor, even if that's true, it demonstrates, Judge Vance interrupted, that Mr. Sullivan was trusted with classified information requiring the highest level of mental acuity and judgment. The security clearances he held required regular psychological evaluations. Those evaluations continued until his retirement in 1997, and all of them found him to be of sound mind and exceptional judgment. She looked directly at Whitmore. Furthermore, after making my calls, I've learned that Mr. Sullivan maintained informal contact with several intelligence community members up until his death. They've confirmed that he was sharp, clear, and fully capable of making his own decisions. My father's face had gone pale. Your Honor, Whitmore tried again, but she held up a hand. I'm not finished. What I find most compelling is that Mr. Sullivan had the foresight to leave documentation specifically for this situation. He anticipated his family would contest his will. He prepared evidence to counter those challenges. That level of strategic thinking is not consistent with someone suffering from mental incapacity. She looked at me. Miss Sullivan, would you approach the bench, please? I stood up, my heart pounding. When I got close enough, Judge Vance leaned forward and spoke quietly. Do you know what it is? I thought about the journal entry. About the mission in Cyprus. I leaned in and whispered, Operation Cyprus Shade. Judge Vance's hand, which had been holding a pen, froze mid-air. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded once, sharply. That's cute. Sufficient, she said. She cleared her throat. Return to your seat. I walked back to the plaintiff's table. Behind me, I could hear my father and Whitmore whispering frantically. Judge Vance straightened her papers. I've heard enough, she said. The evidence clearly shows that Robert Sullivan was of sound mind when he updated his will in 2019. The testimony from the petitioner's expert, while professionally rendered, is based entirely on generalized assumptions about age and medication. It doesn't account for Mr. Sullivan's documented history of exceptional mental capacity, nor does it address the strategic thinking demonstrated in his preparation for this exact situation. She looked at my parents. Furthermore, the evidence presented by Ms. Sullivan demonstrates a pattern of consistent, genuine relationship with her grandfather, while the petitioner's own documentation inadvertently reveals a pattern of minimal contact and primarily financial interest in Mr. Sullivan's estate. Whitmore started to stand, but Judge Vance shook her head. The petition to invalidate the will is denied. The 2019 Last Will and Testament of Robert Sullivan stands as written. Miss Sullivan is the rightful heir to his estate. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. In the hallway afterward, my family surrounded me. You can't do this, Dad said. His face was red, his voice tight with anger. That money should be split. It's not fair. The judge disagreed. Premada Saeed calmly. You manipulated him, Jennifer hissed. You manipulated that judge too. I don't know what you said to her, but I told the truth. I said, Grandpa worked for the CIA. He was involved in classified operations. He was brilliant and sharp until the day he died. The judge verified it. Why didn't he ever tell us? Mom demanded. Her perfect composure was cracking. If he was so important, why didn't we know? Because you never asked, I said. You never asked about his life, his stories, his past. You just asked about his portfolio. Marcus laughed bitterly. So what? You're the golden child now. You get everything because you brought him soup. I got everything because I showed up, I said, every Sunday for 4 years. Not for money, not for inheritance. Just because he was my grandfather and I loved him? This isn't over, Dad said. We'll appeal. You'll lose, I said quietly. Grandpa made sure of that. He documented everything. He prepared for this, and now you know he wasn't just some old man you could push around in court. He was smarter than all of us. I turned to leave, but Mom grabbed my arm. Sarah, please, she said. Her voice cracked. We're family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at her hand on my arm, at the designer watch on her wrist, at the desperation in her eyes that had nothing to do with losing a father and everything to do with losing money. Family takes care of family, I said, echoing her words from weeks ago. But I'm done taking care of people who only see me as a resource. I pulled my arm free and walked away. 3 months later, I was sitting in Grandfather's house in Vermont. Arahazna. Mine. The estate had been settled, the $3.4 million transferred. I'd quit my part-time job at the bookstore not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I wanted to do something meaningful with Grandfather's gift. I was starting a foundation for military veterans who'd served in intelligence operations, for people whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged, for the invisible heroes who did classified work and then came home to silence. I'd name it after Grandfather. The Robert Sullivan Foundation. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Mom's in the hospital. Heart attack. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I picked up my keys and drove to Boston. At the hospital, I found my family in the waiting room. Dad looked 10 years older than he had at the hearing. Marcus was pacing. Jennifer sat with her arms crossed, air face hard. When they saw me, Jennifer stood up. Really? She said. You actually came? She's my mother, I said. Now, she matters. Marcus said, "After you cut us all off, I never cut you off. I set boundaries." Dad walked over. "Sarah, if you're here to gloat, I'm here because Mom's in the hospital," I said. "I'm not here for you." Mom's doctor came out then and told us she was stable. The heart attack had been mild. She'd need rest and lifestyle changes, but she'd recover. "Can I see her?" I asked. The doctor nodded. Inside the hospital room, Mom looked small, fragile. Without the makeup and perfect hair and designer clothes, she looked like what she was, a 70-year-old woman who'd just faced her mortality. "Sarah," she whispered when she saw me. I sat down in the chair next to her bed. "I'm glad you're okay," I said. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't." She closed her eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said. About showing up. About your grandfather. Mom, he used to take you to the botanical garden," she said. "Every Sunday, even before you were old enough to appreciate flowers. He'd push your stroller for hours, talking to you about roses and soil pH and proper pruning techniques." I didn't remember that. I was too young. "He loved you from the moment you were born," Mom continued, "and when you got older, you were the only one who'd listen to his gardening stories. Who'd ask questions, who'd remember what he'd said the week before." "Why didn't you listen?" I asked quietly. She opened her eyes. "Because I was busy. Because I thought there was time. Because I took him for granted." She reached for my hand. "I took you for granted too. I'm sorry." I felt something loosen in my chest. "The money," she started, but I shook my head. "I don't want to talk about the money. I need to say this." She squeezed my hand weakly. "Your father and I, we thought love was providing. Making sure you all had good schools, opportunities, connections. We thought that was enough. We didn't understand that showing up was more important than providing." "It's both," I said. "You can do both. Your grandfather understood that. Show up, and he provided for the person who showed up for him." She smiled slightly. "That's fair. I'm sorry we tried to take it away from you. I'm starting a foundation," I said, "for veterans like Grandpa, people whose service can't be acknowledged publicly. He would love that." "I'd like your help," I said, "not with money. With time. If you want." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that." 6 months after the hearing, I sold Grandfather's house in Vermont. Not because I didn't love it, but because I didn't need a $2 million house. I kept the roses, transplanted them to a smaller property I bought nearby, a cottage with a garden that Grandfather would have approved of. The Robert Sullivan Foundation launched with $1.5 million in funding. We provided financial assistance, mental health support, and career counseling for intelligence community veterans. Mom volunteered twice a week at the foundation office. She'd never held a real job after marrying Dad, and I watched her discover a sense of purpose she'd been missing. Dad didn't apologize. Neither did Jennifer or Marcus, but Dad made a single donation to the foundation, not a huge amount, but enough that I knew he was trying in his own way. Jennifer and Marcus stayed distant. They'd made their choices. One Sunday morning, I was in the garden at my new cottage, pruning the roses. Grandfather had loved. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Sarah Sullivan?" a man's voice asked. "Yes." "This is Ambassador David June. I served with your grandfather in Cyprus. I understand you've started a foundation in his honor." I sat down on the garden bench. "Yes, sir. For intelligence community veterans, I'd like to contribute," he said. "Your grandfather saved my life in Nicosia in 1974. I've been waiting 40 years to repay that debt. I think funding a foundation in his name would be a good start. That would be wonderful. He talked about you, you know," Ambassador June continued, "in his letters. He said you were the one who understood that the best gift you can give someone is attention. He was proud of you." My throat tightened. "Thank you for telling me that." After we hung up, I sat in the garden for a long time, surrounded by Grandfather's roses. The money had been nice. The house had been nice. The victory in court had felt good. But this knowing that grandfather had been proud, that he'd seen me for who I was, that he'd trusted me with his legacies, was worth more than $3.4 million. This was worth everything. I thought about the journal, now locked safely in a deposit box, about Operation Cypress Shade and the classified life grandfather had lived, about the strategic brilliance of a man who'd anticipated his family's greed and prepared accordingly. But mostly I thought about Sunday afternoons in the botanical garden, about an old man teaching his granddaughter about pruning and soil pH, and the patience required to grow something beautiful, about showing up, about love that doesn't require anything in return except presence. That's what he'd left me. Really? Not money, not a house, a lesson. And I was going to spend the rest of my life teaching it to others. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. The roses smelled like summer. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the garden, posted it on the foundation's social media with a caption, "My grandfather taught me that the best inheritance isn't money, it's time. Time spent listening. Time spent learning. Time spent showing up for the people who matter." The Robert Sullivan Foundation honors veterans who gave their time in service of their country. We're looking for volunteers who can give their time in service of these heroes. Details in bio. Within an hour, we had 50 volunteer applications. Within a week, 3 more intelligence community veterans had come forward with donations and stories about grandfather's service. Within a month, the foundation had enough funding to operate for 5 years. And every Sunday, I tended grandfather's roses and thought about the classified operations, the code phrases, the life of secrets he'd lived. But mostly, I thought about the secret he'd shared with me, in the end. That love is measured in presence, not presence. That inheritance is earned not by blood, but by showing up. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply be there. The roses bloomed brilliantly that year, just like grandfather said they would. 6 months later, my parents' financial situation had deteriorated significantly. Without grandfather's estate to count on, they couldn't maintain their lifestyle. Dad's law firm partnership had been strained by the failed lawsuit, internal politics, damaged reputation, clients who'd heard about the case. Mom called me one afternoon. "We're downsizing," she said, "selling the house in Newton. Moving to something smaller." "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. Don't be. It's freeing, actually. I'm learning what matters. She paused. "The foundation work. It's the best thing I've done in years. Thank you for letting me be part of it. You earned it by showing up." She laughed softly. "Your grandfather would say that, wouldn't he?" "Yeah, he would." Jennifer texted once, months later. Just 3 words, "You were right." I didn't respond. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. But some can heal, slowly, if both people are willing to show up. Mom kept volunteering. We had coffee sometimes, talked about the foundation, about the veterans we'd helped, about grandfather's roses. We never talked about the money. We didn't need to. The lesson had been learned, and in the end, that was the real inheritance grandfather had left behind. Not $3.4 million, but the truth that love, real love, is measured in presence, not in presence, not in dollars. Just in showing up every Sunday, like clockwork, like roses blooming in a well-tended garden, predictable, reliable, beautiful. That was the gift, and I was keeping it.